Welcome back to the Oneness channel. This is Soul to Soul, where every heart-to-heart conversation can lead to a soul-to-soul revelation. My name is Wayne Marentette. I'll be your host, and thank you for coming back. I hope you enjoyed the first one. It was a bit of a testament on my part of what I went through, or at least partially what I went through in the afterlife experience, which has a great deal to do with why I created this page. And you'll see why as we proceed a little bit further. When I last talked to you, I spoke about the incident, the accident itself, how a girl was hurt. I got run over a couple of times, how I ended up in the hospital and gone through a lot of surgeries, a lot of repairs, a lot of recovery, and essentially lost my voice for a couple of years and got it back in the third year. But I didn't mention that the girl, after she got taken care of that night, she was sent home, and she was fine afterwards. She did receive over 100 stitches, though, throughout her, on her face, her neck, and her chest area, where this guy had done some damage. And as for the man, I'll tell you, it was 9 months later, almost to the day. No, actually, it was less than that. That was May. In December of that year, he was working at Ford Talbotville, just outside of London. And he came to work drunk one day, and his foreman sent him home. And on his way home, he swerved and just barely, almost ran over a hitchhiker, swerved into the oncoming lane, had a head-on collision and veered off into a pole, and he broke his neck and died on the scene. I was visited at Christmas in the hospital to see if I had managed to get out and had anything to do with it. Impossible, of course. I was a whole 90 pounds of next to nothing, from 180 pounds in great shape to nuts and bolts, bones. And I couldn't breathe enough to walk a single block, let alone be involved in his tragic death. But that's what happened. The girl went on to have a great life, as far as I know. I never saw her after that. And he passed away. So I was left without any insurance, without any... Because they said, the insurance company said, oh, he used this vehicle to assault, and therefore it's a crime, and we have to re-engineer the insurance because we can't cover someone who was using his car as a weapon. So I lost out on that. I got a few dollars from the lawyers for it, enough to pay my medical bills. The biggest one was $125,000 just to get my voice. And Ontario Hospitalization covered half, and other donations covered the remaining balance. But I was left broke. Anyway, I'd like to continue in the story, and I think it's important that I tell you this, because as you're listening in the future, and I'm talking about insights and inspirations that you can work on yourself, in order for you to understand these revelations, it really does help if you get a fix, or at least an understanding of where I'm coming from. Now, I'm coming from pure intent. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell you the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, in everything I communicate about here and in the future. And I hope that one day we'll have a conversation, or you'll want to come to my page and look me up, have a conversation about your own life. Because I want to hear your stories. I want to know what you went through. I want to know what kind of changes you went through as a personality before you discovered the nature of your soul. And I want to hear how it took you long time or short time, or whatever it took for you to integrate that and get to that next level. For example, I know that right now there are half the population, let's say 3 billion people, are spiritually interested in their life. And I mean consciously. Now, of that 3 billion, let's knock it back to about 100,000 that I know of, where you're going to find people who have attained to a high degree of integration and beyond to mastery. They're few, but it takes a while to get there, or at least it used to. And that's what makes this so important. What used to take lifetimes to achieve can now be achieved in little or no time. In fact, at the present time, a person doesn't have to study the way that I did, or doesn't have to know all the things that I discovered, but they do need to know something basic about their soul And that's what we hope to provide, the direct information that'll set you free, help you deal with your ego, and enter into a spiritual initiation that will get you to the level you're looking for, and we call that oneness. But before we begin, I'll go back to my story. I left off, or we were talking about me having getting my voice, but being in the hospital, having a nurse that kind of looked after me. But I want to talk about one incident, and it was an actual experience, many in the 4 days. I evaluated the time I had spent in the 4 days as a number of years in real life. It was timeless, of course, but what I gained was more than I could have had in my lifetime. In fact, when I finally started talking, people couldn't believe me that I had discovered so much or found out so much in such a short period of time. I could talk at length about any of the subjects relative to the soul, and beyond that. My own family attested, well, we knew Wayne, and there's no way he could have known this. He never studied into it. He never had any books. He didn't have any teachers. So how he got there, you gotta believe him. Or at least, that might have been where he got it. But the fact of the matter is, I had substantial experiences, euphoric experiences, that left me with the memory of how to re-enter into that experience and to maintain that rhythm throughout my life. And it brought me many, many things. And I want to talk about that before we actually begin with the discourses that I intend to show you. But let me go back for a bit, and I'll tell you, there was one specific experience that I really loved. It was the most informative and lasted the longest. And it was a period where I was shown how frequencies, vibration, resonance, magnetism, energy, how as light beings, we evolve a language. And how that language, sitting in our DNA, becomes a spoken word. And how that spoken word, from a conscious perspective, becomes active and alive. I was shown how words are actually beings. That every time we speak, we're actually creating something. I had no idea before that this is what was going on. But I was shown 72 variable word state scenarios. Meaning, I was shown a word. I'll pick one, humility. And in that word, I was shown the actual resonant quality of humility that I had in my life and that I had in the afterlife experience. And what its importance was, what it was related to, what connections were attuned to it, what it could create, instill, its action, its activity. I found out that there are variations of frequencies, and they showed me various colors of the rainbow, if you will, different spectrums. For example, I went through one, it was green. They said, pick a color. Okay, and I was looking at all these colors, like drapes of light, and they were sparkly and inviting, and every one of them was inviting, but I was kind of drawn to two colors. First the green one and then the gold one. So I walked towards the green one. They said, proceed. I went into that light, and immediately I found myself looking at desires of the world, of all the things that you would want in this world, heartfelt desires, from the smallest to the greatest things, from the non-spiritual to the spiritual. How having a desire for these things affects us, how hanging on to them as a desire for too long can change our frequency and send us back into a lower frequency. How moving beyond that desire puts us in another frequency. So I end up in the the gold room. This is the end of the experience. 72 variations, 72 words, 72 states, and I'm going into my last word. And they told me, before I entered, there are 49 words you must actualize. In other words, you must think, feel, experience, repeat until it becomes manifest in your natural nature. So I was learning how to discover an attribute word, something akin to the nature of the universe. The universe has 72 attributes that we can know about in our sphere of experience. There's more, but 72 that are primary. 49 gives us enlightenment. The rest lead to self-mastery. And the gold color was the beginning of the mastery. This would take me 12 years to achieve and a further extra 10 years to 12 years to complete that one color spectrum. And that was wisdom. I didn't know what it was in the beginning. I said, beautiful color. It was very influential. It mellowed me out. I felt wonderful. I was openly inspired, and I felt like I was reaching for something. Something was about to happen. Didn't know what. So I walked into the light, and suddenly the room gets I'm in a room. It's transformed. I'm sitting at a desk, glass top. There's a little silver tray with a bar of gold that looks like a stick of butter and a little tiny silver knife. Behind me, on all the shelves, are piles and piles of bullion, gold, coins, bars, you name it, was all there. The ceiling was full, the walls were full, so I had gold and silver everywhere. And I asked, what is this about? And they said, notion to the door. There was a door on the far left-hand side of the room. When someone would come in, I was to give them what they asked for. And I was to give them an exact amount. I would know at the time what that was, and I would watch them leave the premises. They would exit through that door. They would come in from the right, leave on the left. Depending on where you're sitting, how it looks, it's all relative. But there was a sign over the door. I couldn't read it. I didn't quite understand it. It was in a different language to me, no matter what I did with my sight and my sentient capacity. Even asking my guides, what does it mean? I got silence. I was left to experience this. This experience lasted quite a while. One individual at a time, male and female, all various ages, they would come in, come to the front counter, never say a word, but I would find myself giving them a very small sliver of gold or a very large amount of gold. They would take it into their hands, turn around, walk to the door, read the sign, and the gold that they had when they walked through that door ignited a light that I could see transparently from the darkness into the light of the room. And it faded into that purplish violet color. So I could see people coming in the gold room and transforming into a violet flame. And the gold had something to do with their transformation. To me, when I first identified with it, I thought, this is some kind of a payment or a reward or currency for growth, I believe. I'm not sure. I sensed there was no indebtedness. There was no charge. Everything was free. But it was very specific. Each person had a specific rhythm, and that equated to a quantity or quality of their consciousness. I watched, I listened, I observed, and after many days, I kept emptying the walls and they would fill up again. And finally, I asked again, how long will it take for me to finish this experience, to get rid of all this gold and silver that I have? And they said, when the last one has collected what they need. I didn't understand. Why would I have to stay and hand out gold and silver to various personalities or souls as they venture to leave the earthly kingdom, material existence, and enter into the ethereal realm? I wasn't sure, but I waited. And sure enough, it paid off. I was able to eventually read what was on the door, and it read, "Not but the truth prevails." Remember the incident where I'm sitting with my 3 friends? Just before I come back in the body, I have a drink, they say goodbye, and he says, remember, not but the truth prevails. You are imperishable, was an additional thought as I entered the body. Well, imperishability, that word, brought everything back to me. And it was the idea that we're transforming ourselves from an imperishable to a temporary state of mortality, where the body will perish, but we take the gains, integrate those gains, and move on. I also suggested we were here to be wise. This room taught me that we're here to gain from our experience sentiently. That we're here to sense, feel, and experience everything we can, and to garnish that experience, make sense of it, and move on. So that was the understanding I was left with. So I believed that the souls that were coming in had achieved a certain status in their lifetime. And it was how well their personality had been able to attain during that lifetime in regards to their soul. In other words, our soul has its own requisites. Before we come to this life, we decide, this is what I want to achieve because of something I want to achieve there. So while I'm here, I want to achieve an understanding of this, and that. It's all lined up. It's all mapped out. You get your choices, you pick your form, you pick your life, and down we go. As a projection, remember, you're in a room where you are relaxing and you're projecting into a vehicle called the soul that is now embodied as an infant. So we're divine beings having a human experience, but it's a spiritual experience while in a human form. And we're here to garnish and gain knowledge, and transmute that into wisdom, unto a point of attainment. When the soul is satisfied that all the attributes of your spiritual nature have been manifest, in other words, brought to the surface, recognized, actualized, acted on, and they become a part of your natural expression. When your humility, your capacity for love, compassion, benevolence, when all these things come together and integrate, you no longer have to try to be honest, you no longer have to try to be objective, you no longer have to aspire to greater understanding. When all these things about your persona have been integrated, that's when the soul says, now. That is the time the soul gets involved, helps us complete that task, integrates that persona, because that's what it's after. A lot of people think, well, our soul, can we do damage to ourselves in this life that's irreparable? Like, say, if we're evil or something. Well, you can't hurt the soul. That's the first thing. Spirit and soul are not in our control. We're just using the energy as a vehicle of energy. We're just drawing on our soul every day to speak, communicate, eat, sleep, do what we do. Without the awareness that we're here to have an integrated personality. The soul wants to have one personality. Finished, complete, integrated, and that's the end of its task here in this world, as far as I know. And there may be more, but this is the first task of the soul, to integrate a complete personality, free from the negativity, free from the dross and gross of ignorance and corruptibility, free from lacking conscience, free from immorality. So when we learn our moral, virtuous standards about incorruptibility, in other words, when we're decent, we find that all these things occur naturally in our personality. Through natural experience, it tunes itself, and then finally, neurologically, integrates. Our glands activate, and we have what they call the rising of the light body, Kundalini, some call it, others call it physical resurrection, ascension. There are various names for it, but I knew it as the beginning of the resurrection process. In other words, an uninformed personality imbued with a given soul can actualize and become soul-like so well that by following the instructions of their own innate sense of conscience, they become like the soul, and then later they become directly aware of it, and it may be called their higher self. But that is what they integrate, and that is what they actualize. And then the job is done. You get your reward, and you move on to what your true goal is. All of our true goals are hidden from us. We're blank slated before we come in. We don't get to remember everything that we know about all of our experience on the other side. And we have spent far more vast periods of so-called time on the other side than we have ever experienced being in for. But we've evolved to a point where we are now ready to enter into the greater experience, the more loving, the more creative, the more unbelievably potential universe, a creative universe. There's no way to begin to tell you what it is other than beyond phenomenal, beyond wonderful, beyond all expectations. And quickly we forget what this life is about and why we're even here. Like I said, feels like a 20-minute venture to a soul. But it may be, for me, 68 years. It's been 40 years since my accident, so I've gotten that much more. But my objective was to do that immediately. They said, you don't need more than 12 years to do it. But they would help me get there, and that's exactly what I did. I went through other initiations after that, which I would like to express at a later time through this process, along with the discourse information I want to share with you after this third hour. And we will go into it, and there are some things I can show you you've never heard of before, that you won't catch anywhere else, that impels me, that in spite of my voice, I gotta bring this out. You've got to know about this. You need to know that you have a tremendous potential, that there is greatness and beauty and wonder. There is so much to you that you have not recognized or even begun to recognize that is pretty common for all of us. All right? Now, to do that, I'm going to go back and I want to restart. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life preceding this incident, because I think it's important that you have the whole story. It's not like I was a genius, or that I had a high IQ, or I was a favored student. Not in the least. I paid little or no attention to my education when I was younger. When I went to school, I spent most of my time daydreaming, looking out the window, thinking of the things that I was interested in. And they were not relative to what was being taught in the room or on the board. It was a Catholic school, very strict, very taught. I used to get the strap all the time because I was one of those kids who didn't do his homework. I couldn't, because when I went home at night, we couldn't afford the electricity, so I couldn't study on the stairs or do my homework on the stairs or upstairs. There was no room. Or on the kitchen table where everybody sat. No, no, no. You do it before you get home or early in the morning, and that's all the time you have. And if you get the strap, so be it. That was the life we lived. I stayed in that house until I was 14 years old, and it was the most miserable existence that I can remember. From the time I was 5 and inspired to live my life believing I was one of the ones who got lucky enough to have it, to have a life. That was all I needed. I got to live. And that kept me going until I was 14. In the meantime, I didn't know it, but I was being put through a process. We all are. It's usually unrecognized. Sometimes you'll get a hint that repetitive experiences have meaning. I eventually caught on, but not until after I was 28. But in the beginning, I believed in God. I trusted in God. I counted on God. We used to pray to God and sleep at night, my older brothers and sister, the three of us. We would get together at night, sit by the window, listening to the neighbors, because we had to be in bed at 7 o'clock every night, regardless of the time of year. We didn't get to go and play beyond the front yard until you were 16. Yeah, we weren't allowed to go out. The only way you could is if you got a job. So, at 10 years old, I was selling donuts door to door, working in a donut factory, and by the time I was 12, I had a pastry apprenticeship that I was taking with a professional baker and what they called, what was it at the time? It was a creative baking course, basically artistic. I thought I wanted to be a pastry chef. So that was my early decision. That never panned out because my mother would call them and let them know I was underage and I shouldn't be working there, especially after school hours. So they would fire me gently and send me home, but they were happy to have me. But I knew that by the time I was 14, I'd have to have an ability to create an income. So I'd have to learn something. I remember my grandfather one day when I was about 8, he said, you know, you should be a cook. I said, why? He said, because all the people I know that are cooks, they never go without food. They're never hungry. They're always eating, and the best foods, that anything they want. I said, yeah, does it pay well? And he goes, better than the factory guys. And I thought about it. He knew I was selling donuts, and I thought, oh, maybe. but it encouraged me. But before that, I wanted to be the Pope. Yeah, I was an altar boy at 9 years old. And I used to go up and ring the bells, pour the water, say the prayers, sing, do everything that it needed to do, follow the priest back into the vestibule, help him take off his many garments, put them where they belong, put the wine away. He would put the host away and take care of all that stuff. And then we would go and change and go home. On weekends, if you wanted to, you could be, if you were an altar boy, you could make $1 to $2 for every wedding that occurred on a Saturday. So I signed up for them all. I love weddings. I could make $2, had a great time, had money to spend, and I could buy my own clothes. We didn't have any of that. We were very, very poor. My father was 36 when he got married. My mother was 17. She was pregnant. And one child after the other, like I said. My brother in September 49, my sister October 1950, and I came along in 1951. Another brother 3 years later, and another one after that, 4 years after that one. So we were spread out over 10 years. But my mother was very unhappy. Of course, you don't know that as a child. You just sense it. My father would go to work. My mother would sit and be upset all day. I didn't know why. She stopped coming to church with us. She stopped paying attention. She didn't make us lunches or breakfast, barely making us dinner. So we had to kind of scrounge for ourselves from the neighbors and from wherever we could. So going to work early was a good one. It got me out of the house, away from them, and a chance to meet real people and to see the world. Well, I couldn't get enough. One summer I had an uncle came over. I was 10. He lived in Detroit, and he was a bodyguard for William Clay Ford. Of course, he carried a gun. He was in security. But he told me one summer when he visited my parents, it was my father's cousin. He said, "Why don't you come back to my place for a week, Wayne? Come on over to Detroit. I'll show you the millionaire's house, how they live. Give you a good spot. You can eat all you want. You can have fun. There's a pool, everything." I couldn't believe it. There was no favoritism in my family. But for Wayne to be selected, whoa. I paid for it later. But I got to go, and I got to experience that world. And of course, I realized what was out there. My God, there was this city I could see from my house, but I could never go to. And there were all these people. I'm talking millions. I never thought of that. And there were a variety of different races I had not run into. I might have seen the odd person pass by that was either black or Chinese, but I never met any real foreigners, except the Italians who lived across the neighborhood from us. So for me, it was beautiful. And I got a real experience on what I might need in order to maintain my life afterwards. But it also gave me the drive to try to emulate my uncle, to get a better education, be a better person, to be trusted, and to find a secure financial job that would provide me with the things I desired when I grew up. At least I thought. But the things that when I returned home, the beatings continued, and they got a little worse. As we got older, they got harder. I'd be sitting at dinner time, and my mother would just do a quick backhand, boom, right into the forehead, knuckles into the head, slap in the face, slap in the back of the head, stick across the back, the knee, the ankles, the arms. She was better than a cop handling his stick. She knew exactly what to hit that would knock you down, that you wouldn't get up from. A certain muscle, down you go. She was very good, and she knew how to punish people. And I could never understand why she wanted to punish her children and why she hated us so much. My mother would lift up her blouse and say, this set of scars, like bacon strips, those are from you. These are from your sister. These are your other brothers. And I was like, oh, we were all responsible for having put her through that, damaged her body, made it very difficult for her, and we were not grateful to her. In fact, we were argumentative, and every time we started to argue, we'd get another crack in the mouth or back of the hand or sent off to the upstairs were down to the basement. Well, at 12 years old, I started buying my own clothes so well that I had to have a separate place for them. So they moved me to the basement. It wasn't finished. It was just cement walls that had been whitewashed. And in the winter, they hung up their clothes. But I had a single bed down there, and I was allowed to come and go from the basement. There was only one way out if I didn't take the stairs, and that was through the window. So if I was working late, I had other jobs at night. I'd be working at either Red Barn or something like that, Harvey's, McDonald's, whatever I could get my hands on. And I'd get the extra money at the A&W, and I'd stay all late, meet some people, sometimes go roller skating. I'd buy those, and then I'd come home. But if it was after 6 o'clock, even if I had worked, the only way in was through the basement, or wait for my dad to unlock the door in the morning when he got done work, or when he came home from work, or got up for work. It was very difficult for all of us. And I always wondered, why did it have to be like this? Why so much stress, animosity, ignorance, hatred, vengeance, venom? Why all the nasty name-calling, humiliations, embarrassments, and beatings? Other neighbors went through part of it. I know the other kids in the neighborhood, there was over 100 in my block alone. Some went through it. Some were criticized by their parents and humiliated and hit, but not like our house. We stood out as being the primary house for the function of deterred aggression. Her children, my mother's children, would not be like anybody else because she criticized every one of them. And we would be sitting on the porch, and a neighbor would walk by, and she'd wave, smile. And as soon as they were out of earshot, she'd tell us, "Oh, he thinks he's this, he thinks he's that. Look at his hair. Look at the way he walks." I mean, we never got books. I never once had a book. No one taught me ABC, 1 + 1, nothing. I went to school one day and went, wow, this is where we get to learn things. My brother goes here. So what do we start with? I'm telling you, we were left to ourselves to raise ourselves at our own expense, and they would throw food on the table once in a while, but interfere in their life, and you paid for it. You were to be silent, in the corner, shut up, say nothing. If a relative came over, we sat, all 5 of us, on the couch or on different chairs in the living room, and not one of us could say a word, or we'd get a beating right there in front of everyone, or after they left. So I used to, as I said, I wondered, why does this have to be like this? My sister and I would pray that my mother would die. I remember saying, come on, God, please, can't you make her happy, take her to heaven? Please, we've got to get out of here. This can't be right. And now I'll tell you about something else that I did I'm not proud of. My older brother, he's only 2 years older than me. He heard me complaining with my sister one day. Of course, she's blind, can't see anything. So I got to drag her everywhere. And my older brother was kind of satirical. He picked up from my parents. He used to get me in fights. He'd go to someone and say, hey, you see that girl with no hair? Yeah. Isn't that your sister? Yeah. But you see the guy next to her? Yeah, that's my younger brother. And he thinks you're a fool. Well, these guys would come up to me and start fighting with me over nothing, and I didn't know why, and it was my brother telling them I said things. He thought that was funny. Thank you, Doug. It didn't last that long. Eventually, I got a little bit bigger than him and took him down in the hallway one day, and we haven't fought since. My parents tried to get us to fight each other, but it was bizarre. I didn't want to do it. Didn't want to go through it. So, when the time came, he was, I guess, 11, I was 9, and one day we said, look, we had a neighbor whose house burned down, and they had 18 children. The wife had gone to the hospital to deliver her 4th set of twins out of 18, and she was only in her late 30s. Her husband was a drinker. They were both alcoholics, and the kids would hang around the front yard with next to nothing on, and they'd pee everywhere, poop in the backyard. They only had one bathroom. Their house was identical to ours. 1 bedroom on the main floor and a split attic. So where do you put everybody? Mattresses all over the place. That's how they lived. Well, one day, he came home drunk, the father, and he set fire to the house while all the kids were at school. His wife was in the hospital. When he came back that night after the hospital, they found their house had half burned down. The whole top half was gone. My mother was quite frustrated that the house hadn't burned down along with theirs so that we could have gotten a new one. But they didn't own the house. We were renting. And my father was a vet, so that's what they gave us. So we got together and conspired and talked to each other. My sister said, look how well the kids are doing over at Uncle Lou's. Look how well these kids are doing from next door with new relatives and new families. They split them all up. They went to different places. I even went and visited a few of them. They were so happy not to be a part of 18 now that their mom was gone and their father was out of the picture. They got presented in unique homes, a couple of them together or 3 of them together in one spot, the girls. And they were happy to be able to go to school and have an education, have a regular meal and have clothes and just have a decent life. And my sister said, why can't we do that? No, I don't know. No, that's horrible. Well, my brother decided it was a good plan, that we could do it, and that way we could each be given a new home. My sister wanted to go to my uncle's, who treated her well and felt sorry for her. Okay. And I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it wasn't there. So we conspired one night that the next morning, on the way to school, I would grab my sister. My brother would go ahead, watch out, make sure everything was clear. And just after breakfast, when my mother usually talked to the neighbor on the front porch, I would run out after setting the fire in the attic and run to school. I remember taking a couple pages of a book my brother had given me for my confirmation and a set of matches. He said, just like those, drop them and run. I said, okay. He said, otherwise she'll smell it. I said, all right. So very nervously, I threw the match down onto the paper, and I wasn't sure if it connected or not, but I was out that door and I ran. I got to school and I was the most nervous person you could have imagined. I was freaking out. Eventually a nun came to the desk after we heard the fire truck going down the street, and she asked for me, and she sent me to pick up my sister in another classroom, and we were instructed to go home. And the nuns watched as we left from the schoolyard to our home, 3 blocks away. They could watch us. And my parents were waiting for me at the end of the block, along with my grandparents. I got jostled about, punched in the arm a few times, pushed down, threatened, smacked in the face a few times, and told to sit on the back porch. The fire trucks had left there was a part of the floor had actually burned around the paper. There was no real fire, but the paper burned, and that was enough smoke and fire to scare everybody, of course. So the first thing my mother did was call she threatened to call what was called social services at the time. And she's warned us, when they come here, you better tell the truth, because when they're done, you're not living with me anymore. You are being sent to reform school. I thought, oh my God, that's a penitentiary for boys as far as I knew. I started crying. I thought it was horrible. Next thing I know, the priest from the local parish, my mother called him, he shows up. He's on the back porch. And he asked me, he said, did you do this? I said, yeah, well, we did, because we thought that if we did like the McCall, the neighbors, that we would get a different home and we'd be out of here and away from all the problems. And he goes, well, what problems? I said, well, I talk about it at school all the time. I get the strap all the time for not doing my homework. My mother won't let me. She works against us, and we all get beaten all the time, and it's a nightmare here. Nobody wants to believe us. He left me, went back inside, talked to my sister. She came back out, went back inside, and eventually within an hour he left. My mother came back out to the porch, and I said, are they sending us away now? She said, no. You go sit at the end of the yard. Don't move. Sit very still. Smack, smack, smack. You wait there until I'm at time for you. She took the other members of the family in the house, put them through an interrogation. And later that night, she sat me down while everybody went to bed, and she said, no, your father's going to work. When he's gone, you and I are going to talk. And she sat there with a book of matches, and she lit one. She'd wait till it went out, and she'd drop it on my skin. She would put your arm there. I had to feel what it might be like if I had caught fire, because if the house had caught fire, she might have died in the fire, and it would have been my fault. Oh, so again, I was even more frightened. I thought I should just go right out the back door, but my father had also instilled fear in us about the night. When I was younger, my father thought joking was a good way to educate your kids, so tell them stories that aren't real. We had alligators and lions and tigers and you name it. At the night, my father used to have to fight them to come home, and that's why we didn't want to go out at dark. I'm 9 years old and still believing this. I wanted to go out that back door, but I was afraid I wouldn't be able to take care of myself, and I'd probably get caught and end up in jail or die. But the word came down that the social services were never called, because the priest intervened and said, if you call them, you will lose them. My mother said, good. And he said, wait a second. He meant forever. They will take them away, and you will never see your children again. It was okay with her, but not okay with my dad. And he said, no, we're not calling anybody. We'll take care of it at home. And that's when I became an altar boy. The priest told me to come to church, and they'd straighten me out and turn me into an altar boy. The more I knew, the more I grew, the more I wanted to be a part of that. I even asked the priest one day, can I be an altar boy? Can I, as an altar boy, could I go to school and become the Pope? Well, no, you're not Italian. I said, oh, you have to be Italian? He said, oh yeah, at least. And it's a lot of studying, I don't think you got it. I said, oh, could I be a priest? And he said, maybe. Why do you want to do that? I said, because I love it. I love being here. I love being a part of this. He said, well, we'll think about it. I'll keep an eye on you for a couple of years, and we'll see how well you do. Okay. 2 years later, I'm serving Mass. We get done. I help the priest. He turns to the left and he goes, you go ahead and change. I went ahead into the other room where the altar boys usually went, and we put on our cassocks and elms. And so I took them off, hung them up, and I waited inside the closet to surprise my brother. He was coming out from a 20-minute Mass. And I thought, I'll just wait here. And when he comes, I'll open the doors and scare the bejeebus out of him. Well, that's exactly what happened. He came out, maybe 10 minutes later, I opened the doors and went, yeah! And I got greeted by a hand. I went flying across the floor. I was crying before I hit the floor. I ended up at the other end of the room. And I got up, shaking, and I walked out the door as the priest told me, don't ever come back. That's it. I thought I got hit by God. What had happened is he had not gone to his vestibule and gotten rid of the chalice and the host. Instead, he was hanging on to them because he wanted to talk to the boys. And when he came in the back, when I sprung the doors open, he got frightened and went, whoa. And what did he do? He dropped the chalice and all the hosts were on the floor. Now, in those days, we used to hold what was called a paten, a little bronze plate. And when people got communion, altar boy would come along and he'd hold it in case it fell off of their mouth or off their tongue, just to make sure that any pieces that fell would go into the priest's cup, because it was sacred, sacrilegious to drop one. Can't touch one, only a priest. Okay. Well, now that they were all on the floor, I had committed, I don't know how many sacrileges, knocked out on the floor. Get up, just like my family, and get out of here. Well, I never went back to the Catholic Church except to steal a bike on the odd Sunday and go for a ride. Or to sneak up into the vestibule, 'cause that's how I found out how to get up there. But, or into the steeple, but I never went back, but I was curious. Very, very curious. I used to come home and tell my sister. At night, I'd say, you know, I was just up at the steeple. And she'd say, so? Well, I had a talk with God again tonight. Yeah, what'd he say? He didn't say anything, but he made me feel something. And I feel like as long as I keep doing this. She goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you have to get quiet. She goes, how? I said, well, you don't say anything to yourself. You go real quiet, and then you ask a question, but you don't think anything. After the question, you wait. And as long as you wait, eventually, a feeling will come with an answer. She said, you're nuts. I said, no, it's true. But we talked about the concept of God, what the universe might be, what is there life on other planets, that kind of thing. And my promise to my sister was that the day I ran away, I would take her with me because she couldn't stand being there and had to get away. She didn't like being called a vegetable. Her nickname was Baldy. My mother would stand on the porch because she had no hair, and she'd yell, Baldy, get your ass home. My sister would be wherever she was. She'd come up from around the corner and come in the front door. That was not her nickname. Her name was Maureen, but she never was called Maureen in that house. My name was Fatso. I was 9.8 pounds when I was born, so that's where I got my name from. Even my first name is not my first name. My middle name is my first name, Francis. I'm supposed to be Francois Godet. Did Marentette. But now it's Wayne. My father promised his mother, who was Irish, that he would never marry a French woman. He was French. Well, he married a French woman, so they switched the names. It was crazy. It was bizarre. The things I was learning at school didn't even relate to me or my life or anything else. Nobody could tell me why I was hearing music sitting in silence. No one could tell me what we used our mind for, what our senses were for, how I could feel things and I could hear things differently than others. Nobody wanted to hear about that. I used to ask my teachers, can you help us understand how to use our imagination better? And I just get a blank look. What? How do we use our imagination better so I can do better at school? Well, you have to study. Okay, but I want to employ my imagination. Do you know any methods? And they look at me like, what are you talking about? Just memorize. Oh, is there better? No, you know the formula for memory. You repeat it until you got it. You keep saying it to yourself until you understand it. Oh, okay. No answers. Same with the priest. Do you have any pieces of the cross in the church? Are they hidden? Do you know any secrets? Can you tell me anything? Only for priests. Oh, what are some of the secrets? Can't tell you. But they led me to believe that there were some secrets. You're just not going to learn them unless you go to their school. So my dad let my mother actually agreed to let my brother, my older brother, go to pre-seminary. And of course, he didn't want to be a priest. He just wanted to make sure he got the chance to do it in case he wanted to, more than I did. So he went to a junior high where they taught Latin and certain indoctrinations in the doctrines of the Catholic Church. And of course, by then I was already done with the church and had no more interest in wanting to be a priest. But our life continued to be quite painful, and we kept paying for it. And one day my mother decided to start charging me rent. And I was no longer to use their hydro to do any ironing. In fact, I had to buy my own iron and my own ironing board and my own hangers. Because if I'm going to wear special clothes that I bought for just me selfishly, I couldn't hang them in the closet with other siblings' clothes. It would make them jealous, so they were to remain hidden and out of sight. I never understood it, but I can tell you the first day I was on the road and on my own was the happiest day of my life. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I didn't care if I lived or died beyond that. No one knew me. I was free. I could be anybody. So I started calling myself Canada. Everywhere I went, whether it was Kentucky or Alabama or Missouri or Florida, Biloxi, anywhere and everywhere I went, I did my best to try to find a job where I could cook in the kitchen, do breakfast or something on a weekend. And I got lucky and got jobs along the way. A lot of waitresses helped me. They gave me tips and free meals. because I was young. They felt empathy for me, and I appreciated it. But I worked my way. I went back and forth across the streets, driving people's cars for them at nighttime when they wanted to sleep. And they were long distances, so we would do that. And this continued for about 8 months until I finally settled on a spot that I wanted to live. Pretty cold in the winter. I mean, you don't have any clothes. You need somewhere warm to live. Well, my first day in Tucson, Arizona, turned out to be one of the best days of my journey. It was warm, it was beautiful, and it was winter. And I couldn't believe it. And so I met up with some friends at a canyon one day where we used to go swimming, called Sabino Canyon. You might be familiar with it. There was a time it was wide open to the public, and all the kids from school and university would go there. And you'd see them on the weekends and even during the week. And we'd dive off the cliffs into the ice-cold water, rapids. It was great. I had a tent. I shared it with other people. Pretty soon there were 5 tents, 6 tents, 10 tents, 20 tents. And every weekend it would switch over. But there was always a group of 8 or 9 guys that stayed with me. And these are the guys that had been drafted and were avoiding the draft. But they stayed with me in the canyon because it was the best spot for the time being for them to think things out and survive. We'd sell campfire. Anything we could sell to campers, anything we could, bramble, bush, anything. We'd collect it, sell it, and that would be our food for the day. Other guys brought joints at night, different things. I never partook, but I enjoyed the camaraderie, sitting around with educated, intelligent people, and I just wanted to be a part of it so bad. So that's where my life was. And as I said, when I came home, I got put in jail. They said, let me out. Eventually, I had to join the Navy. I spent a couple of years in the Navy trying to get a trade that didn't work out because there was no programming to be had. And finally, when I'm out, I got a decent job. I started to settle down. I started making money, and I made good money. I was a good salesman, and that's what I found to be my thing. Although I did work in the factory from time to time, I was a foreman at Ford's for a while. I made enough money to buy myself a house, got married, had a daughter, and then that was it. I knew my life was over. I couldn't continue in that chosen life. I had to go back to school. All my friends were going back to school. I had to. I knew without the education, and regardless of how much money I had, I wasn't going to go anywhere or satisfy some deep longing I had. But I had always had that longing to continue that silent relationship with God at heart, right to the day I got run over. And that was the day I got my answer. That's when I found out we're more than human. We're far more than human. This is a temporary lapse in time where we get to experience a unique, we'll call it unique and original, a feeling of separation. You have to know what it is to belong to a school of fish and to be brought out of that and sit in a tank by yourself before you understand uniqueness or individuality. Well, there's a collective consciousness on the other side, which we can share here if we can attain to it. We are still connected, but we still think of self-interest, selfishness, self-desire. And so we plan our lives thinking there's me and I'm up against the world. So none of the things that were necessary in life was I ever taught as a child. And the lessons truly began at this point. Differently than the past. Now, from one trauma following another, I had finally achieved a point of peace and solace as I lay in my bed in the hospital in pain, gratified that something wonderful had happened to me, that I now knew greater truths that I could have ever asked for. And I wanted to know. I could never find a way to get a response from God. I prayed, I did everything. I stayed silent for hours, but I never heard a word from God. I didn't stop believing. I knew I was protected. I knew I was being looked after, and I knew I was being drawn through these experiences for a reason. But it wasn't until then that I found out what it was. And I'll tell you all about it when we come back. See you on number 3. Thank you for listening. Thanks for putting up with this. And I hope you enjoyed it. I believe it's necessary that you heard this part so that you can understand a little bit more about myself, where I'm coming from, and how I'm projecting that I'm just an ordinary individual guy, nothing unique or special. And having had this experience that changed my life, and the discoveries I've had since then, I have no reason not to be inspired and to try to inspire you. So, after the next one, I'll start with a series of inspirations. I'll explain them in detail, and you'll be able to adopt them in your own life. And hopefully we'll have a conversation after that. So until we see you again next time, gracious peace, and have a great life. Thank you.